faith. Okay, so when pastor is preaching and you're sitting here and you're phasing him out, you're thinking about something else, you're daydreaming, you might be asleep, whatever. Just him preaching and you hearing it doesn't do anything for you. But when you come in and you're saying, he's preaching the Word of God, and I need that like food, I'm here to feast on that Word of God, and you're here to accept it by faith, to receive the Word of God by faith, then it works to the hearer by grace. So we are strengthened by grace. That's what he says here in verse 9. And that's how that happens, which again is why Sunday morning is so important, not just to be here, but to be prepared to be here. And he says, it is good for the heart. Okay, so for the heart of man, and this goes back, he's going to start going down this path, but he's going back to this theme of the inward part of the Christian life being an inward reality, and as opposed to the external rituals of the Old Testament. And he's starting to go down that way. So the New Testament religion is a religion of the heart. And we strengthen our heart by grace, not by foods which have not benefited those devoted to them. So this is going right into the food laws of the Old Testament. The clean and unclean, and what sacrifices in particular, the sacrifices that are made that you would partake of eating. Okay, so, or the priests would partake of eating in particular. The priests would partake of eating some of those sacrifices, and that's how the priests were paid primarily in the Old Testament. So he says, it's not just keeping food laws or even eating the foods of the sacrifices that benefit you, okay, but it's the preaching and teaching of the Word of God that strengthens us in the inner man when received by faith. We get grace from that. Now in verse 10, he's going to go down into this kind of sidetrack. We have an altar from which those who serve the tent have no right to eat. So, in fact, I think maybe, I don't know, we want to wait till next week to get into this. Okay, see if I can do this succinctly. So in the Old Testament, you had the priesthood who did the sacrifices, who took the animals and made the sacrifices on the altar. If you were not a priest, if you were not a qualified priest, remember you had Levites, then you had, some were disqualified from the priesthood, some were qualified for the priesthood, that segment of the priests who actually did the sacrifices. If you were not one of those, you could not perform a sacrifice. It was against the law. See Saul. Okay, King Saul tried to do this. He tried to perform a sacrifice. Not in accordance to the law, because he was not a Levite. He was a Benjaminite. So what he's saying now, though, what the author of Hebrews is saying, is because we're not under that old covenant anymore, and we're under this new dispensation where we are worshiping now in the inner man, spiritually, we have an altar that those priests who aren't believers don't have access to. Okay, so we have access to something by faith that they don't have access to because they don't have faith. So they have access to an altar that we don't have access to, a physical altar, but we have a spiritual altar that we have access to by faith that they don't have because they have not exercised faith. So where is this food sacrifice? Well, it's sacrificed on an altar. So we go from the foods to the priesthood offering sacrifices. And it says, we have an altar from which those who serve the tent have no right to eat. So he's turning this thing upside down on its head, kind of, and making a paradox of it. Okay, so verse 11, we'll pick up in verse 11 next week, Lord willing, because we'll talk about the sacrifice in Jesus and being outside the camp. We'll pick up on that next week. So I think that would be a good place to stop. So any other questions? No, go ahead. Okay. All right, so let's close in prayer. Carl, would you like to close us in prayer?
All right, our Heavenly Father, thank you for giving us teachings of what you want from us and the grace you give us through Jesus Christ. We pray that we can encourage each other and continue to study your word.
And thank you.